Welcome to Darkness Notes coaches, terrifying secrets, and mysterious stories that will make you tremble. They told you faith was your light. They didn't mention the chains. For 23 years, people disappeared into the Kentucky hills. Not drug addicts, not outlaws. Farmers, teachers, children, 412 souls-gone, erased. And if you're hearing this, you're already part of what you were never supposed to know. You see, this wasn't a cult in the woods. It was a government-registered, tax-exempt, praised by ministers religious community. On the surface, Pleasant Hill looked like heaven, but hell doesn't show its face. The year is 1807. The Shaker revival burns through the bluegrass like divine wildfire, and in that fire, something was forged that never died. Our family, a system, machine. The Richardson family. But this isn't a story about religion, it's about power. It starts with a man named Samuel Richardson, by all accounts, a gifted preacher, commanding voice, silver tongue, and the kind of gaze that makes you feel like he's looking straight into your guilt. They said he came from Ohio with the fire of Mother Ann Lee herself, but the papers, they don't tell you who funded his journey, and they certainly don't tell you what happened to the man who owned that land before Samuel arrived, because the land was bought in cash, no deed of sale, no local witnesses, and the previous owner, a certain Elijah Ford, missing since 1806, his house burned to the ground. Official cause, lightning strike, but the skies were clear that night. Samuel didn't come alone. His wife, Martha Richardson, came with him, publicly celibate, as all Shakers were, required to be, but privately. She shared a locked wing of their home, 6-room quarters, custom-built, off-limits to the rest of the community. No one entered, no one questioned. Martha was quiet, soft, spoken, eyes like melted glass. She read people like scripture, used kindness as a weapon. Her voice never rose, but those under it bent like wheat in the wind. She ran the psychological machinery of Pleasant Hill and knew exactly who would submit, who would break, and who would never be seen again. Their children were born in silence, no public record, no midwives involved, but they existed. Ezekiel, Caleb, Rebecca, Patience, born into control, raised without external contact. They were the system's future, engineers of silence, masters of illusion. In 1810, Ezekiel was put in charge of agriculture. A young man of 22, built like a workhorse, with the calm face of a monk. He turned Pleasant Hill's farmland into an empire, his yield 3 times that of neighboring farms. Miracle? No. Forced labor from converts who had nowhere else to go. Punishment disguised as productivity. His brother Caleb watched from the shadows, the so-called security director, no title, no office, but everyone knew, if you tried to leave, you spoke to Caleb first, and no one spoke to Caleb twice. The daughters, worse. Rebecca was the handler, the psychological mother. She'd welcome new converts with hymns and open arms, but behind those hymns were loaded questions, and behind those arms was the cold grip of assessment. She'd decide who stayed, who transformed, and who struggled with earthly ties, a phrase used before they vanished. Patience kept the books, handwriting flawless, records immaculate, deaths documented, births created, correspondence forged, every letter you thought you received from your loved one at Pleasant Hill. That was Patience. She knew your son's nickname, your daughter's dog's name. She forged love with ink like it was divine truth. But none of this was obvious. Not from the outside. From the outside it looked perfect: stone buildings, singing gardens, polite greetings. Market visitors wrote letters home. The Shakers live like angels. Hardworking, peaceful. No one saw the cracks, because the cracks were inside and filled with ash. And when outsiders asked questions about where a convert had gone, or why someone's letters had stopped, they got paper. Proof. Signed, handwritten, forged, never real, never challenged. The state never intervened. They had no reason to. Local sheriffs were given donations. Local churches were praised for partnership. Local judges were hosted at the community's banquets. They were seduced by perfection, blinded by worship, and the few who weren't, silenced. Officially, 412 people were accepted into Pleasant Hill between 1807 and 1830. They're in the records. They signed papers. They handed over land, possessions, livestock, and then nothing. No recorded deaths. No transfers. No marriages. No burials. Just absence. An absence so complete it became invisible, because absence, when organized, becomes silence. And silence was Pleasant Hill's native tongue. But silence has weight. You don't feel it at first. It's soft, like snowfall, but over time, it crushes bones. In Pleasant Hill, that silence lived in the eyes of those who remained. They didn't speak of the missing, not because they forgot them, but because they were trained to forget themselves. Every prayer, every hymn, every meal was ritualized to erase doubt, to swallow questioning before it reached the tongue. They called it submission, but it was obedience carved by fear. The first documented outsider to break that silence was an Ohio State inspector named Harold Minton. He visited in the winter of 1831 under the pretense of evaluating agricultural output for a new regional trade initiative. He was not devout, not even particularly curious, but he had one weakness: an obsession with record-keeping, numbers, patterns. He arrived with a clipboard and a smile. He left without his mind. Harold's initial reports were glowing: clean barns, healthy livestock, bountiful produce, but his notes held inconsistencies. Too much food for too few people. Storage units that rotated more goods than the farm could plausibly produce. No visible elderly, few children, no graves beyond the communal six, marked with crosses to new for the dates engraved. He returned a week later, unannounced. That's when he met Sister Rebecca. He asked simple questions innocently. Why were the membership logs sealed? Could he speak to some of the longer-standing residents? Was there a reason for the unusually high purchase orders of chamomile, foxglove, and nightshade? Rebecca smiled, told him she admired his dedication to detail, invited him to dinner. Hannah prepared the meal. Minton wrote that it was hearty, calming, and fragrant. It was his last recorded meal. The following morning, his escort returned to the gates, claiming Minton had received a telegram and left abruptly overnight. No witnesses, no note, just gone. His family never saw him again. Kentucky authorities closed the case in 12 days. Voluntary disappearance, they wrote, personal reasons. But 3 months later, Minton's journal was found hidden in the lining of his traveling satchel, discovered by a consignment clerk in Lexington who had no idea what he'd found. The journal never made it to public archives. It was intercepted, silenced. The clerk vanished weeks later, but a copy survived. It was passed hand to hand, year by year, across church basements and private libraries, until it landed in the lap of a former intelligence officer turned folklorist named Jeremiah Lowen. He went public in 1984. He wasn't just curious, he had seen this structure before. In Vietnam, in Central America, closed systems, psychological torture masked as belief, reward systems tied to compliance, language stripped of contradiction, and always, no exit. He claimed Pleasant Hill was not just a rogue religious community. It was a prototype, a human laboratory, a test for control. And when he published his findings, they erased him. Not legally, not publicly, but his license was revoked, funding pulled, marriage collapsed, friends turned. He died in a motel outside Danville in 1989, drunk, alone, and surrounded by microfiche clippings of missing persons reports. But before he died, he left a final note. A single phrase: the God they worshipped never left, because he was never divine. Think about that. This wasn't a failure of a religious group, it was a design machine that ran on belief but was fueled by submission. Engineered by a family, yes, but protected by something deeper, something older. You see, institutions don't bury secrets unless they're valuable, unless those secrets serve a purpose. Pleasant Hill was never just a community, it was a model, and models get replicated. The question is, how many more Pleasant Hills were built beneath different names, and how many of us are already inside them? Before we go deeper, comment this phrase below twice so you don't forget it and the algorithm doesn't miss it. I do not belong to their world. Say it again. I do not belong to their world. Because if you've made it this far, you never did. There was a reason no one ever escaped Pleasant Hill. Not truly. A few left, yes, under highly controlled conditions, but their minds never returned. The outside world labeled them damaged. Some were found wandering highways, muttering psalms. Others simply sat in corners of mental wards, repeating names no one could identify. The system worked not just by force, but by design of the self. You weren't held by bars, you were held by belief. But not your own belief. A belief implanted, built brick by brick, like the stone walls of the community itself. The Richardson family were more than just leaders. They were architects of consciousness. By 1817, they'd refined the indoctrination process into a precise, multi-stage protocol. It began with isolation. Newcomers were immediately separated from all known ties, including spouses if necessary. Letters to family were assisted by sister patients, who ensured no harmful nostalgia leaked out. Next came confession, not to God, but to the Richardsons. Members were required to document every sin, thought, and doubt from their past, lives in exhaustive personal testimonies. These records were never destroyed. They were indexed, filed, used. The third stage was ritual submission, public renunciations of identity, witnessed and applauded by the congregation. Converts were stripped of their names, given new ones based on a coded system no one outside the family fully understood. You weren't James anymore, or Catherine, you became Brother Matthias, Sister Elora, empty vessels, rewritten by their hand. The final stage was the most dangerous, the mirror room. It was located beneath the meeting house. No one spoke of it directly, but every member passed through it once, one time only. Inside was nothing but a single chair, a wooden crucifix, and a mirror 10 feet tall, candlelit. It wasn't about reflection, it was about confrontation. You were kept there for 3 days, alone, no food, no light save the flickering flame. But the mirror was angled perfectly to capture not your body but your doubt. They said the room showed your true self, but what it really did was shatter whatever was left of the old one. Survivors of the mirror experience emerged docile, quiet, submissive. Some whispered afterward that they had seen a figure behind their reflection, something standing just slightly off axis, watching, measuring. One convert wrote a note before his disappearance. I saw the eye in the flame. It blinks once every hour. His name was erased within the week. By 1820, Pleasant Hill operated like a closed-loop behavioral experiment. The economy thrived. Donations flowed in from naive outside sympathizers. The community's handcrafted furniture was sold at triple value to collectors fascinated by the Shaker aesthetic of purity through labor. But that labor wasn't pure, it was extracted, engineered through exhaustion and psychological binding. Each product carved by hands that no longer belonged to the souls inside them. And the Richards, they became something more than human. They didn't age like the others. Samuel's beard never fully grayed. Martha's posture remained upright into her 70s. Locals whispered rumors that they had made a pact with something that didn't want worship but obedience. Some called it the Hollow Father. Others just said, the one who dwells behind the door. Because in the basement of the East Wing, the original infirmary, there was a door no one had ever opened. Locked with 3 iron bars, no handle, no hinges, covered in symbols, never spoken aloud. Only the Richardsons ever entered, and only during the solstice. No one knew what was behind it, but every year, on the longest night, a sound would rise from beneath the chapel floor, a kind of hum, low, vibrating, not mechanical, not natural. It didn't come from beneath, it came through. Those who heard it for too long developed nosebleeds, night terrors. Some clawed their own ears in the days following. The sound was never discussed. And anyone who did, they vanished next. The ritual was simple, and always the same. At midnight, the entire community gathered barefoot in the central courtyard. Candles lit. No one spoke. Samuel stood at the center, flanked by his children. He raised his arms, eyes rolled back, and then the humming began. No one ever saw where it started, but it swelled until it echoed through the bones, and then it stopped. Samuel would say one phrase, "The soil has been fed." No one knew what it meant until they found the shallow graves. Not one, dozens scattered across the orchard, the old quarry, the herb gardens, discovered only after the community was disbanded after the fire. Some bodies showed no signs of trauma, others had crushed rib cages. One was found without a face. All were dated between 1808 and 1833, and none were in the official burial records maintained by Sister Patience. The graves were fed, the silence enforced, and the sound, it never stopped. Even after the last building burned, hikers reported feeling ill near the ruins. Compasses spun, phone batteries died, birds refused to nest, and at night, especially on solstice, you can still hear the hum. They said Pleasant Hill vanished. They were wrong. It was never meant to be seen. It was meant to be repeated. Asterisk. In 1997, an independent researcher named Dr. Alina Rourke, Ph.D. in behavioral anthropology from Northwestern, filed a formal request to access sealed land records near what remained of Pleasant Hill. She wasn't some conspiracy theorist. She'd spent years researching isolated communities and had a reputation for meticulous, clinical objectivity. But what she found broke her methodical mind piece by piece. Within 3 months, she'd abandoned academia. Within 6, she went silent entirely. But not before sending a private file to a former student, labeled only the second structure. It was a blueprint, not architectural-psychological. The diagram outlined stages of belief manipulation nearly identical to Cult behavior but scaled to the size of a town. The terms were chilling: sensory folding, identity reconciliation, echo conditioning, subconscious reintegration. It read more like a psychological weapons manual than a religious doctrine. Rourke's notes compared it to classified government techniques used during early MK Ultra trials. But what truly shattered her were the margins, scribbled, frantic, in ink darker than the text. There are 7 of these. Pleasant Hill was only the first. We don't know what the other 6 were called, but over the past 50 years, strange, self-enclosed religious communities have surfaced and disappeared across the US Midwest, always rural, always small, always tied to land transactions involving private trusts with no traceable owners. Some claimed to be reformed Anabaptists, others simply the children of the soil, but the rituals were always the same. The silence, the names, the mirror. One survivor, a boy named Travis Hale, escaped from one such group in 2003. He was found barefoot on a highway in Indiana, dehydrated and clutching a hand-carved wooden medallion etched with a spiral. He couldn't speak for 2 weeks. When he finally did, the only thing he said was, "They buried the stars under the church." He was 10. Travis vanished from foster care 6 months later. The couple fostering him claimed he ran away, but they never explained why they had a locked basement with soundproofing and a Bible in a language no scholar could identify. That home burned down in 2005, cause unknown. Case closed. The Richardson name has not disappeared, it's simply changed shape. A branch of the family now operates under the surname Redstone in upstate New York. Others live quietly in Colorado, claiming no connection, but the money moves silently. Real estate acquisitions, non-profit front groups, spiritual retreats, with NDA requirements. You can trace the roots if you look hard enough, but you won't find answers, just repetitions. Because that's how this system survives. It never attacks, it invites. It asks you to believe not in God, but in structure. It rewards compliance with comfort, and punishes deviation with vanishing. And you begin to wonder, what if the disappearances aren't mistakes, but offerings? You see, the soil still needs feeding, and somewhere out there, behind a chapel door with no handle, something is still humming, still listening, still waiting for the next name to be erased. You were never supposed to hear this, but now that you have, you're already inside the ritual. The fire that ended Pleasant Hill in 1834 wasn't the work of accident or fate. It was retribution, and it didn't come from outside, it came from within. Her name was Lydia May, born into the community in 1809, baptized in the hollow stream, beneath the orchard trees. But Lydia was different. She didn't take to the rituals the way others did. When they gave her the name Sister Althea, she refused to answer. She whispered her birth name into the night and hid shards of it in the floorboards beneath her sleeping mat. She remembered her mother's eyes, how they dulled after her time in the mirror room, how she stopped singing, how she stopped speaking. And when her mother vanished in the winter of 1821, Lydia was only 12. That night she dug into the frozen garden with her bare hands, convinced her mother had been buried like the others. All she found was blood-soaked earth and a single tooth. She hid it in her hair ribbon for the next 13 years. Lydia became what they feared most, aware. She began collecting stories in secret from others who doubted but had no words for rebellion. She mapped out the schedule of the Richardsons, watched their movements, tracked the guards during the solstice rituals, and one night, she followed Brother Nathaniel Samuel's eldest son into the forbidden infirmary basement. What she saw, she never wrote down, but her final journal entry before the fire simply read, "The door is not a metaphor, it breathes." She spent 2 years planning the destruction. She mixed lamp oil with dried herbs in the infirmary walls to create a smoke so thick it would disorient anyone trying to escape. She stole keys from sister patients while she slept. On the summer solstice of 1834, during the soil-feeding ritual, Lydia vanished from the crowd and made her way to the lower quarters. The fire started in the east wing. Within minutes it spread across the tightly built halls. Some tried to contain it, others prayed, but Lydia locked the doors from the outside. She made sure no one reached the basement. When the flames finally reached the door, someone screamed from behind it, a scream that was not human. That night, 57 members of Pleasant Hill died, including all 5 direct descendants of Samuel Richardson. The fire burned so hot that the foundations melted into black glass. The official report said it was a tragic accident involving heating oil, but no one explained why the bell tower rang 12 times at midnight when no one was inside to ring it. Lydia was never seen again, but in 1904, during excavation for a railway line near the ruins, workers uncovered a copper box buried beneath a marked stone. Inside was a ribbon, a tooth, and a note. I locked the door, but it dreams, and dreams, don't burn. That box was confiscated by a government agency the workers couldn't identify. They were paid off, silenced, relocated. One moved to Montana and later claimed to see Lydia's face in his barn. Mirror every solstice, smiling, watching. The Richardsons were buried, their buildings reduced to ashes, but their design, their pattern survived. Not in scripture, not in memory, but in structure, because what Lydia tried to destroy was not a community, it was a prototype, and every prototype leaves behind instructions. Today, if you search Pleasant Hill, Kentucky, you'll find curated photographs, serene music, reconstructed buildings, and smiling guides offering history tours. They'll speak of the Shakers, how they lived simply, worshipped purely, and vanished gracefully into history. They'll never mention the 412. They'll never utter the name Richardson. And if you ask about the basement, that was never rebuilt. Beneath the meeting house, they'll politely redirect you to the gift shop. But there is one photograph kept off the public tour, never digitized. It's stored in the archives of a shuttered private museum in Lexington, taken in 1906 by a surveyor named Ellis Ward. It shows the foundations of the original infirmary, charred and cracked. At first glance, it's unremarkable. But in the bottom right corner, partially obscured by shadow, you'll notice something most never catch. Fingernail marks, deep, violent, scratched into stone, and beneath them, etched into the floor in a pattern that doesn't match any known language, spiraling inward like a vortex. Ellis Ward died 2 months after taking the photo. The official cause, cardiac event, but his wife reported strange behavior in the final week, muttering in his sleep, refusing to enter churches, and once, during a storm, tearing all the mirrors from their walls. When asked why, he whispered, "They're windows if you look long enough." That photograph, like much of the real evidence, was sealed under heritage preservation statutes, but copies circulate, carefully, secretly, among those who understand. That history is not a recorded mechanism, a design built to be misunderstood. We call them ghost towns, failed communes, forgotten sects. But what if they weren't failures? What if their purpose was never permanence but incubation? Systems need testing, control needs variables. Every psychological weapon has a trial run, and Pleasant Hill was a near-perfect closed loop. Isolated belief, obedience without enforcement, rituals designed to replace reason, and when the loop broke, it wasn't abandoned, it was replicated elsewhere, under different names, across time. Do you think that ended in the 1800s? Look again. Modern retreats, high-control wellness groups, motivational boot camps wrapped in corporate gloss. Watch their language, how they invite, then isolate, how they redefine the self, how they use rhythm, repetition, purification. It's the same mechanism, the same ancient pattern, it just wears better clothes. So next time someone offers you enlightenment, a breakthrough, a way out of your pain, look closer. Is it freedom they offer, or structure? And if it's structure, ask yourself, who built it? Because behind every smiling face, there may still be a door, and you've already heard it breathe. They say some stories survive through whispers, but this one persists through silence, ritualized, encoded, inherited like a blood debt, not spoken aloud, not written on paper, but passed in fragments between those who've seen too much and survived just enough to remember. And what they remember most isn't the fire, it's the eyes, dozens of them, in rows, watching from the dark beneath the floor. In 2018, a researcher named Dominic Reyes stumbled onto something that was never supposed to be found. He was compiling a private database of American utopian experiments, everything from Shaker communes to modern polytheist enclaves. That's when he noticed an irregularity, a repeating cluster of land purchases under shell companies with biblical names: Ephraim Holdings, Zion Reserve, 12 Lampstands Trust, all across Appalachia, spanning from Kentucky to West Virginia, Tennessee, and southern Ohio. The properties always shared 5 traits: rural, isolated, near a water source, previously owned by religious groups, and purchased in years that coincided with major solar eclipses. One location, filed under Tranquility Creek, matched the coordinates of a Naurist settlement 10 miles from Pleasant Hill. Reyes went there. His last journal entry was recorded on a backup SD card recovered from a cracked camera found half buried in clay near a collapsed root cellar. It read, "They sing in mirrors. I saw my reflection turn its head before I did. There are no windows. Here only watchers." That SD card also contained a 10-second video. It's never been released to the public, but one frame from it, enhanced and examined by independent analysts, shows what appears to be a spiral of people kneeling, heads bowed, surrounding a pulsing red stone. Some wear white robes, others are nude, and at the center, not human, tall, thin, draped in black, with fingers that bend the wrong direction. One analyst, a former digital forensic specialist for the military, quit his job 2 days after viewing it. His only comment: whatever that was, it wanted to be seen. So, why hasn't the world heard of this? Because it isn't hidden. It's encoded through history textbooks that mention utopias but omit the vanishes, through churches that preach purity while naming no origin, through foundations and trusts that claim heritage preservation while bulldozing burial sites, through architecture, through song, through symbols mistaken for decoration. It's all still here. Pleasant Hill didn't die. It shed its skin. And every 23 years, it eats again. This isn't just a story, this is a cycle. A mechanism older than any country, disguised as faith, powered by obedience, and refined through generations. The only way to escape it is to name it, but naming it means seeing it, and once you've seen it, once you've seen it, truly seen it, sees you back. Some say what happened at Pleasant Hill was just hysteria, oral madness, group delusion, religious overreach. They want you to think it was a footnote, a glitch, a shameful chapter closed by fire and forgotten with time. But the ones who survived, those who escaped before the final solstice, tell a different story. Quietly, desperately, with eyes that don't blink as they speak. Because they know the fire didn't kill the mechanism, it baptized it. There's a woman in Clay County, Harker, she's 92 now. In 1946, she was one of the children taken in by a restorative faith shelter 20 miles from the ruins of Pleasant Hill. She was 6 years old. They gave her a new name, shaved her head, made her memorize scriptures that no one else in the world can trace, and every night they made her kneel before a painting of a black door that had no handle. She still dreams about it. She tried to forget, moved north, married, had kids, but something followed. Her son Michael disappeared in 1974. No struggle, no signs, just gone. A week later, Evelyn found her old name, Sister Novella, carved into the inside of his closet wall. In a language no one taught her, the same language etched into the basement stones of Pleasant Hill. She's not the only one. In New York, a retired FBI agent named Russell Ford tried to reopen the Pleasant Hill case in 1991. He requested documents from the National Archives. The next week his house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but every mirror in his home was smashed. Every clock turned to 12 o'clock, and on his bathroom wall, drawn in charcoal, was the spiral. Ford disappeared in 1993. His last recorded call to a colleague contained 6 words: "It's not dead. It remembers names." That's the part no one talks about. This isn't just about missing people, it's about repeating people. Names that show up again. Faces that look too familiar in generations, decades apart. Birthmarks in the same places. Dreams shared by strangers. Children drawing the black door without ever seeing it. What if the ones taken weren't lost, but changed? What if the system doesn't just feed, but recruits? Not with threats, not with chains, but with promises. Of clarity, of purity, of transformation. You've seen the slogans, you've heard the speeches, you've felt the pull when someone tells you that the world outside is broken. That truth is inside, that they have the map. They don't want your money, they want your identity, because once you become part of the structure, you can't see the spiral from inside, and the door doesn't need to chase you. It waits. Patiently. ChatGPT said, there's a boy named Carter Briggs, age 11, who vanished in 2019 near Irvine, Kentucky. He had been playing in the woods behind his grandmother's house, a place the locals called the Quiet Bend. No major search party was formed, no umbrella. Why? Because Carter wasn't registered in any school system. He'd been homeschooled under a private religious license filed under the Disciples of Plainwork, a group with no website, no pastor, no tax filings after 2006, the house they lived in, no plumbing, no internet, no neighbors for miles. But inside that house, the state trooper who filed the initial report, Officer Len McCarthy, described something no one would believe. Every wall, every beam, every stair, carved. Hundreds of spirals, tiny at first, then larger, intertwining, pulsing out toward the center of the house like veins. The basement was padlocked, but the air that leaked out from the cracks made the officers vomit. They called in hazmat. The entire structure was razed 2 weeks later. Official reason: black mold. But no biological samples were ever recorded. Officer McCarthy retired that same year. His final public statement was brief. Something was growing in there, but it wasn't plant, and it wasn't animal. People forget Carter, like they forgot the others, like they forgot Sister Novella, like they forgot Pleasant Hill. But forgetting isn't erasure, it's consent. The silence we wrap around these stories doesn't protect us, it feeds them, because if no one looks, if no one asks, then the spiral grows, and it grows best. In blindness, there are records buried deep in Kentucky archives, mislabeled underwater damage or incomplete survey, blueprints to chapels that were never built, land transfers signed by men already dead, medical records stamped with symbols instead of signatures, and photos blurry, overexposed, shadowy, but always with one figure at the edge of the frame, tall, watching, present across decades. It's not about the community, it's not about religion, it's about structure, a design that recycles pain into power, that turns obedience into architecture, that makes the vanishing look like choice, and builds the next gate with your hands. Maybe you think you're safe, that because you know, you're immune, but this isn't a ghost story. Ghosts don't design systems, ghosts don't file paperwork, ghosts don't recruit, believers do, and they don't need to hide anymore, because they've already written their mechanism into your world. Self-help seminars, silent retreats, behavioral camps for children, suburban ministries with no denomination, they wear new faces, but whisper the same doctrine: purify, obey, repeat, vanish. The door doesn't need to be in front of you, it only needs to be in your mind. And once you believe it's real, it is. ChatGPT said, there's a tape, unmarked, found in a flea market bin outside Somerset, Kentucky, a rusted VHS with no label, no case. When played, it begins with static, then a woman's voice reciting a hymn in a language no archivist has ever successfully translated. Behind her voice is something else, a low hum that rises and falls in perfect intervals, like a mechanical breath. Then the video shifts. It's grainy, black and white, a room with no windows, just stone walls and a circular pit at the center. Around it, 12 figures kneel in total silence. No one speaks, no one moves. But in frame 1874, exactly 1 minute and 2 seconds in, one of the kneeling figures lifts their head. It's Carter Briggs, aged, changed, eyes black as oil, face slack with serenity. He opens his mouth, and from the tape erupts a sound no one can describe. Not a word. Not a scream, something else. Those who've watched it say it feels like forgetting something important, like waking up with someone else's dream in your mouth. The tape vanished 2 months after it surfaced. The collector who found it was later arrested on unrelated charges, but in his cell he carved a single phrase into the wall using his own fingernails. The cycle breathes through blood. That phrase has appeared in 5 other crime scenes over the last 50 years. Never officially connected, never reported in national media, but always there, always etched, always near places linked to the vanished. This isn't a coincidence. This is an algorithm of belief, ancient, precise, perfected. One that does not need you to believe in it. It only needs you to participate. You think it's not happening now? Look around. The language is different. The clothes are modern. The messages are cleaner. But the spiral remains. Hidden in logos. Drawn into the architecture of courthouses, schools, even hospitals. It's in the timing of mass disappearances, in the recurrence of solar events tied to violence, in the way certain sites are never developed, never mapped, never sold, just kept. By who? By descendants, initiates, recruited not through threat, but through revelation. They're not fanatics, they're architects. Engineers of the next spiral, building networks, planting symbols, seeding questions so you look in the wrong direction when it begins again. Because that's the final truth. You were never meant to find Pleasant Hill, you were meant to replace it, brick by brick, choice by choice, generation by generation. And if you've ever felt watched in silence, if you've ever dreamed of a door that doesn't open, if you've ever seen a face you can't name in a crowd and felt them smile just before you blink, then maybe it's already begun. You think 412 is just a number, just a tragedy buried in rural myth. But what if I told you it's not a body count, it's a threshold, an equation, a quota. In the oldest surviving journal from Pleasant Hill written by a woman only identified as Mother Enid, there's a passage dated July 3, 1822. The ink is faded, but legible. She writes, "The gate opens only once the tithe is complete. 412 vessels, no more, no less. All must be willing or reshaped." That journal was recovered during a farm demolition in 1987, beneath a floorboard sealed with bone nails. It was immediately confiscated by private contractors who arrived before state authorities. No logo on their vans, no paper trail. But the crew chief Caleb Whitaker was later found dead in his bathtub, drowned. The water had been boiling, his lips were burned shut, but on his forehead someone had carved 413 runes. The sum, a spiral, is mathematical, deliberate, ritualistic dot, and now here's the real horror. In 2022, a man named Mark Billings, an independent data analyst, cross-referenced over 2,000 unexplained disappearances across the Midwest. He wasn't looking for Pleasant Hill, he was building a model to study geographic criminal clusters, but his algorithm triggered a pattern he couldn't explain: clusters of 412 disappearances every 23 years, all within a 120-mile radius of central Kentucky. Each wave exactly 412. Always rural, always forgotten. And in the center of the map, an unincorporated township with no census data, no schools, no churches, just 3 square miles labeled Preservation Reserve, privately owned, by whom? A holding group, Tithe Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware, founded July 3, 1999, the same day as the last recorded cycle began. This is the machine, a human calendar, a system so ancient it predates your God, your government, your memory. And what powers it? Consent, not of the mind, but of presence, of silence, of never asking, of looking away when the boy disappears, of saying it's probably nothing when the 4th house on your street is suddenly empty, because they don't need to hide anymore, they just need you to normalize the spiral. And we've already started. You think this is the end of the story? No. It's the 412th story, and the next one begins with you. ChatGPT said, the final piece isn't buried in the woods, it's not locked away in some forgotten basement, it's in plain sight, inscribed on the ceiling of the last known chapel built by the Richardson Line, a place most people now call the Hollow Chapel, torn down in 1933, foundations paved over, now a parking lot behind a Dollar General in Berea, Kentucky. But a photograph survives, taken by a traveling architect named Jonas Keller in 1929. The image is monochrome, faded, almost illegible and enhanced. On that ceiling, carved with a kind of obsessive precision, are 412 small human figures, each one different, each one posed in anguish. In the center, one larger figure, head bowed, arms extended, with no face. Beneath it, carved in Latin, Domus non vidita, Domus mene, the house is not seen, the house remains. That's the heart of it, isn't it? They don't need to own the land. They don't need to keep the buildings. They only need the shape. The map. As long as the spiral remains intact, so does the system, rebuilt in new forms, new names, not through force, through invitation, like the therapy communes springing up across southern Kentucky, like the detox ranches that require no ID, like the off-grid retreats advertised with phrases, like repattern your spirit or empty yourself into the design. They're not fake, they do heal something, because they operate on truths older than medicine, truths that ask, what are you willing to forget to feel whole? And some say yes. Some go in with pain and come out clean, empty, calm, obedient. Their names change, their histories blur, and their loved ones, they stop looking, because Pleasant Hill was never just a place. It was a prototype, a blueprint. The silence wasn't the result, it was the product. And now that product is scalable. Digital platforms, virtual communities, AI-driven healing programs. They've modernized the doctrine, but the hunger is the same. Obedience, disappearance, completion, 412 vessels every 23 years, one spiral, until the gate opens. And if you've stayed with this story until now, understand you weren't watching. You were being watched, measured, considered, marked, because belief isn't the gateway, awareness is. Now, you know,